until you make the unconscious conscious. It will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung's words echo through the dim corridors of the human heart. For in love, and especially in intimacy, we meet not merely another body, but the truth of our own hidden self. Picture this: two lovers in the quiet hours before dawn. The air still, the world hushed. Between them, no words, only a gaze. A gaze that feels less like looking and more like remembering. Something ancient stirs beneath that silence. Not lust, not conquest, but recognition. Have you ever wondered why some men seem transformed in moments of closeness? Why their expression softens? Why their breath deepens? Why, just for a heartbeat, they seem utterly unguarded? It is because love has a way of exposing what no confession can. In the language of Jung, every act of intimacy is an encounter between personas and shadows, between the mask we show and the self we hide. When a man truly loves, that encounter becomes sacred. He cannot fake it because the unconscious speaks through every gesture. The first sign appears in his eyes. When he looks at her, not as an object of desire, but as a mirror of his soul, something changes. His gaze lingers, not to possess, but to witness. The ancient poets called this seeing the beloved as the soul's reflection. Jung would call it a moment of union, where consciousness meets the unconscious, and for a brief instant, they become one. It is said the eyes are the windows to the soul, but few understand how literal that becomes in love. When a man loves deeply, his gaze carries no agenda. It's open, still, and almost childlike. He looks not to control, but to remember who he is. Because love, when genuine, dissolves the masks we wear. He may not even realize what's happening, only that something within him feels exposed and yet safe. That is the paradox of intimacy. It terrifies and soothes at the same time. The woman who receives that gaze often feels it not in her mind, but in her body, a quiet knowing that she is being seen, not looked at. For those brief seconds, the psychological distance between them disappears. What stands there is not two individuals, but two reflections meeting. And yet, this gaze can only appear when love transcends desire. In shallow connection, the eyes wander, distracted, hungry, uncertain. But in deep connection, they rest. They see. Because true love doesn't crave stimulation, it craves recognition. A man who loves with his soul does not need to look away. He is not afraid to be seen, nor to see. But here lies the hidden truth. For most men, this kind of openness is frightening. To look deeply is to confront the shadow, the repressed parts of himself he has long avoided. Love, therefore, becomes both mirror and test. Through her eyes, he meets the parts of himself he has denied, his vulnerability, his need, his fear of being unworthy. And yet, it is in this confrontation that love becomes transformative. Because when he chooses to stay in that gaze, to keep seeing and being seen, he begins to integrate. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming whole. You see, the gaze is not just affection, it is alchemy. There was once a woman who described how, after years of an empty marriage, she met a man whose eyes unsettled her. He did not compliment her. He did not chase her. He simply looked, quietly, steadily, as if he could see the history of her pain. She said it felt like he was reading her, not judging her. She wept later, not out of sadness, but relief. For the first time, she felt seen, not desired. That moment, she said, changed her life. Because in his gaze, she remembered herself. And that is what love does when it is real. It returns us to ourselves. A man who loves deeply allows his eyes to speak what words cannot. He looks at her not with appetite, but awe. Not with pride, but presence. It's a spiritual seeing, born from the soul's desire to connect beyond ego. The gaze becomes a silent confession. I am here, and I am not hiding. In that stillness, his entire body aligns with truth. The muscles soften, the breath deepens. The performance ends. The self steps forward. It is not seduction, it is surrender. And yet, the world rarely understands this kind of love. We are taught that attraction is power, that desire must dominate. But Jung reminds us that love is not domination, it is transformation. The man who dares to meet another soul without armor is not weak, he is awakening. Through that gaze, he enters what Jung called the participation mystique, the ancient psychological state where boundaries blur and two beings sense each other beyond form. It's the sacred communion of the unconscious, where one soul says to another, "I recognize you," and that recognition heals. Because in truth, what every man longs for is not conquest, but connection. What every woman longs for is not perfection, but presence. When the gaze becomes communion, both are seen, both are changed. That is why true intimacy begins not in the body, but in the eyes, where consciousness dares to meet its own reflection. It is the invisible threshold where persona meets shadow, and both dissolve in light. You may have seen it yourself, a look that silences time, that feels almost holy. It's not the eyes alone that make it powerful, but what stands behind them, love without fear. In that gaze, there is no winning or losing, no control or submission, only truth. And perhaps this is why such moments feel eternal. Because for a brief instant, two souls remember what it means to be whole. Love, when it is deep, does not demand to be seen, it sees. It does not beg for attention, it witnesses. It does not conquer, it connects. So, when a man looks into the eyes of the woman he loves and allows himself to be seen, he is not performing, he is returning home. And in that sacred silence between their breaths, where words fall away and presence remains, the unconscious finally speaks. You are safe, you are known, you are loved. Love is both a mirror and a fire. It reflects who we are and burns what we are not. When two souls draw close, their connection awakens not only tenderness but tension. What we call chemistry is often the psyche's deeper recognition, the meeting of two unconscious worlds. Jung would say that every relationship carries a psychic task, to reveal what each must integrate. That's why true intimacy doesn't always feel peaceful. Sometimes it feels unsettling, like standing too close to truth. The closer we get to someone, the harder it becomes to hide from ourselves. The mask slips, the wounds resurface. A man may find himself impatient or withdrawn without knowing why. A woman may feel anxious or unseen even in love. These reactions are not failures, they're revelations. The unconscious has begun to speak. In Jungian terms, every lover becomes a symbol. The beloved represents our own inner opposite, the anima or animus, carrying the traits we've disowned. Through them, we see the forgotten pieces of ourselves. That's why love can be both ecstasy and ache. It awakens joy, but also demands honesty. To love deeply is to stand before the mirror of the soul and not turn away. For the one who dares to stay, who doesn't flee the discomfort, who meets it with awareness, love becomes a sacred teacher. And in its fire, both lovers are purified, not destroyed, but transformed. Have you ever noticed how a man's silence can say more than his words? When a man is deeply in love, he doesn't just speak differently, he behaves differently, often in ways that defy logic. Jung believed that what seems mysterious in men is rarely random. It's the unconscious revealing itself through subtle gestures. He becomes gentle in moments he once met with control. He lingers longer, listens closer, as if the noise of the world has quieted inside him. To him, intimacy stops being about conquest. It becomes communion. In the presence of the woman he truly loves, the armor cracks. Not because he's weak, but because his soul recognizes safety. The masculine and feminine energies, long divided, begin their silent reconciliation. This is not about dependency, but devotion. He starts protecting not from fear, but from reverence. Touches carry presence, not performance. Time with her feels less like escape and more like arrival. In Jungian language, this is the moment when the animus, the inner masculine, begins to integrate love with consciousness. Such a man doesn't love because he needs, he loves because he sees. And in seeing her, he meets himself, the part of him that longed to be both strong and soft. That's the hidden language of love. What the psyche cannot yet say, it shows. And if you've ever felt that quiet transformation between two souls, where silence feels full and closeness feels eternal, then you've touched something holy. The soul of love itself. Love doesn't whisper, it remembers. And every memory becomes a mirror of the soul. When a man loves deeply, he begins to move from instinct to intention. What was once physical becomes spiritual. What was once desire turns into devotion. In Jungian terms, he is no longer driven by the primitive impulse of possession. He is drawn by the archetype of union. His love becomes symbolic, an act of becoming whole through another. In this stage, the psyche isn't chasing pleasure. It's seeking reflection. Every touch, every glance, every moment of silence becomes an exchange of unconscious truths. He doesn't love her for who she appears to be. He loves her for what she awakens within him. Through her eyes, he begins to see his forgotten depths. Through her presence, he rediscovers the innocence that time buried. A man who loves deeply begins to protect her not as property, but as presence. His instinct shifts from control to care, from demand to understanding. This is the transformation Jung hinted at, when the ego, humbled by love, surrenders its crown. He stops trying to define love and starts to serve it. He no longer performs affection, he embodies it. When she speaks, he listens with his whole being. When she's silent, he still feels her. There is an invisible dialogue happening beyond words. Two psyches, two worlds, intertwining like roots beneath the soil. In such love, both are changed, not because they complete each other, but because they awaken what was asleep. He becomes gentler without losing strength. She becomes stronger without losing grace. They mirror each other's sacred opposites until the boundary between self and other begins to dissolve. Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." That is the essence of this love, not comfort, but evolution. The bed, once a place of escape, becomes a temple of truth. What happens there is not lust disguised as love, but consciousness learning to hold another soul. And when love reaches that depth, words fall away. What remains is stillness, the kind that feels eternal. He may not say, "I love you" often, but you'll feel it in the way he breathes near you, in the way he remembers the smallest details, in the way he touches you as if time itself has slowed down to honor that moment. Because to a man who is truly in love, love is not an emotion. It is devotion in motion, a silent prayer lived through the body, spoken by the soul. And when you meet a man who loves like that, you'll know, not by what he says, but by what his silence heals.